welcome into this week's edition of RNN Talks right here on Racing News Now. Thanks for joining me. I'm your host, as always, Garth Allen. Thanks for joining me for this action-packed episode of RNN Talks. Like I said on pole position on Monday, if you're getting tired of hearing nothing but NASCAR here on Racing News Now, then you are in luck because we are finally hitting the point where we're starting to get the other big forms of motorsports in action. IndyCar picks up things this weekend for their first race of the season for the Firestone Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. And of course, you know we had to bring our IndyCar correspondent Tom Poole on this week to talk about that. So let's just go ahead and get right into that, and we'll see what Tom has to say about the IndyCar season as a whole, St. Petersburg this weekend, and we'll talk the Indy 500 a little bit as well right now. We're now joined by our IndyCar correspondent, Tom Poole, who's going to break down the IndyCar season for us, which starts this weekend. Tom, how are you doing tonight?
Good, Garth. How about yourself?
I'm not too bad. I'm ready to talk some IndyCar with you here, Tom. Are you?
Yes, sir. Been a long off season. Let's go.
I will not disagree with that. All right, so the first thing I've got for you here, there have been a lot of big changes in the offseason here, namely Carlin Racing moving up from the Indy Lights, now with Charlie Kimball and Max Chilton, both moving over there from Ganassi. Harding Racing will be putting together a full-time campaign this season. Mike Shank Racing is coming over from Sports Cars. Ed Jones has moved to Ganassi. Zach Veach will be a new face at Andretti. Takuma Sato's now with Rahal Letterman Lanigan. And Tony Kanaan's at AJ Foyt Racing now. So, Tom, what do you think, or let me rephrase that, whose change do you think will benefit them the most this season, and whose change maybe will hurt them the most this season?
Well, first off, you missed the most important thing of the year, the new car. I mean, that's going to be huge. But with that being said, too, I mean, a lot of this year's kind of a lot of returning home for some people. I mean, you've got Carlin coming back, Sato, Carlin coming up, Max Chilton going back home. Obviously, he was kind of very influential in bringing Carlin over here to the States. They started in Indy Lights, and that's where Max got his start before he jumped over to Ganassi. You've got Sato going back to Rahal Letterman. Again, you've got Zach Veach coming back to Andretti. He was a big Indy Lights driver for them a couple years ago. Just kind of things like that. Spencer Pigot was with Juncos last year. So just everybody kind of coming back full circle. So things like that. I think somebody who you should really watch out for that benefits the most is Ed Jones moving into Ganassi. Obviously, Ganassi is very dominant, in IndyCar for sure. Ed Jones had a really good year last year. I mean, he was running really well for Delcoin. Delcoin had a very good year, and I'll get more into that a little bit later with as a shocker for the year, Sebastian Bourdais. I mean, he had the lead going into Indy until he had that crash and then was sidelined for most of the year. So Ed Jones, I think he's really going to turn some heads with a little bit better of equipment. However, that 10 car had kind of seen a decrease in competitiveness throughout the years. Tony Kanaan was in it. I think he's still a decent driver. I don't know how much, was just him getting a little bit older or how much, maybe the competition in that car was decreasing a little bit too. We're going to find that out this year as well. I think that's a kind of a good move. I wouldn't really mark him as, the big loser for the year moving to ABC and Foyt. I think Foyt is starting to turn some things around. We saw that towards the end of the year with Carlos Munoz and Connor Daly. They started to really get some traction and move forward. A lot of people were blaming those two drivers, most of the year last year. But even when they had Takuma Sato, towards his end, The team itself was really starting to fall and things like that. They're a lot older crew wise. They've got a lot of people that have been there a while. So I know Larry Foyt was talking about how those guys were kind of starting to adjust and finally starting to get their feet under them. So I think that'll be, a decent fit. I wouldn't mark Kanaan as a big loser because, I think that would be okay. Plus, when he left Andretti, everybody was saying that was his career, and he ended up going over to KV, and that was basically the rebirth. He won the 500 after a few years. He was really competitive because it lit that fire under him, and I think he's going to have that fire lit again, So I know I said earlier that he's a little bit older, and I think that kind of contributed to a little bit of the 10 car there, but I think just because he's older, he's definitely not done.
Now, okay, so we've gone through what you think the biggest one to benefit from this is, and what you think who is going to maybe get hurt the most from these changes. Which of these really is the most surprising change to you? Which of these maybe did you not see coming?
I didn't see ABC completely resetting like they did. I didn't see them dropping both Connor and Carlos. I talked to Connor last year towards the end of the year in St. Louis, and I know that he was talking about, obviously they weren't having the season that they wanted. He went out and finished in the top 5, which was a great result for him, and they really needed that. That team really needed that. But he was talking about making some improvements, and at Indy and things like that, there were some accidents that were his fault. Some things he did. But, he understood that. He took full blame, took full responsibility, and the team was telling him that they were there to, work with him and help him, and it really seemed like he was going to have that ride again this year. And, in fact, they didn't tell him that they were going to move on until he actually took that month break when they went out to film Amazing Race. He came back to find out that they weren't going to renew his contract and stuff like that. So even he was blindsided there. So, yeah, I think that was kind of the biggest change. I know Carlin had been talking about making a team. I was kind of more surprised they didn't make a team last year because I know Chilton was wanting to go back there. And remember, his dad has a lot of money from Gallagher, which has been his sponsor ever since he's gotten to IndyCar there. So that's kind of what kind of started rumored that rumor has kind of been what started that team. So, but yeah, that ABC was definitely the biggest shock, and also Sato going back to Rahal Letterman again.
Okay, so just from you and I talking a little bit over the past couple of weeks, you've mentioned about some rookies that you think have been pretty fast throughout the offseason, preseason testing, and that kind of thing. What rookies are those that have been that fast, and can they follow up and be competitive once the season starts?
Competitiveness, I don't know. I mean, you're going to have some decent rookies here. Zach Veach, still technically a rookie, even though he ran a few races last year and before. Also, Robert Wickens coming from the sports car. He actually didn't make an IndyCar Series debut last year, but he actually practiced at, I think that was Road America. And that was when it was right after Le Mans, and their former driver, Mikhail Aleshin, got caught up in customs, and he couldn't come back into the States in time. And earlier in the year, his good friend and now teammate, James Hinchcliffe, those guys, both Canadians, they raced go-karts together as young lads, and they were good friends. They did kind of a seat swap because they both shared Lucas Oil as a sponsor. So Robert Wickens kind of came in, drove James Hinchcliffe's car, loved it, showed great pace, great speed. And that's when Sam Schmidt called him in to kind of shake down the car for Mikhail, who couldn't get through customs. And now here they are, teammates there. So I think Robert Wickens has probably the best chance of getting up to speed. Matthias Lees, he was good in Indy Lights. I think he was good. He was the lead rookie at the Phoenix test. However, he crashed 3 or 4 cars doing so. He caused. I think he had 3 brushes with the wall and another spin that didn't have any contact. He's got good speed, but it'll be interesting to see how he does in the in pack racing and in race setup with other cars out on the track. The good thing about that, though, is you have Tony Kanaan as your teammate, so he can share a lot of wisdom with him and get him ready there. But I think as far as the one that has the best possibility of being competitive would be Robert Wickens with his sports car background.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit here now, not necessarily looking at the season as a whole, now looking at the premier race of the season, the Indy 500. Danica Patrick making her final Indy 500 start, her final motorsports start period with Ed Carpenter Racing at this year's Indianapolis 500. How will she do in her final race?
It'll be interesting. She's got a team. She's got speed. Ed Carpenter is always fast, especially at Indy. They've really got stuff figured out there. Hildebrand's been in the top 5 quite a bit. Carpenter's been knocking on the door. I mean, he's got a couple of poles in the past 5 years and always knocking on the door right there during the race. They just always get caught up in late instances. So she's got the speed. But the big thing for her, I remember, talking to her about when she said going to Daytona. It was different because she raced in Homestead and was coming back, so she didn't miss anything that any of the other guys missed. It was just like coming back for the season. She didn't miss that. Here, it's totally different. Not only has she been out of the sport for the last near 5 years, but she's also missing the first half of the season. So the thing that kind of works for her is it is a new car, so everybody's kind of going to be learning it, especially here at Indy. But at least some of those guys are going to have 4 or 5 races under their belt in this new car. While none of them are quite like the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, holding it out and just letting it hang loose, they still kind of know what to expect and things like that. So I think this year she does have a little bit of a better chance at being competitive because of all the changes. But I still don't think she has a huge shot at being up top and being competitive.
So we have, as of right now, 36 cars entered for the Indy 500, or at least planning on being there for the Indy 500, which means the return of Bump Day, which we haven't seen in a few years. Tom, how important is that, or is it important at all?
Absolutely. It's very important. I talked to a lot of people that just kind of go out for a qualification day, time trials there in the month of May that don't really follow the sport. And they've kind of been bummed the last few years. And I mean, even those who really do follow the sport, it's just the format they have is just not really, it's almost anticlimactic. I mean, there's, the Fast 9 they introduced, I think back in 2009 or so. That was great. That was cool. Everybody loved it. And it's still okay to this day. But what people enjoy is they enjoy them going out and making multiple attempts and risking everything. And, I remember the days when we had bump days and you'd have those guys, back at the bottom half of the fighting it out for the final spot. And, some of them would crash. I remember Sebastian Saavedra, he found out news that he qualified for the race in the hospital. So it's just things like that. I mean, you miss those cool storylines. You miss, pulling your times and going out. I remember the years when the Andretti's were really slow to get to pace. And in fact, Ryan Hunter-Reay didn't qualify for the field. That was when, because they were going to lose so much money from DHL because they didn't make the Indy 500, Michael Andretti struck a deal with AJ Foyt, bought the car. I know his name. I just can't think of it. Roberto, no. It was one of those. But yeah, anyway, bought that car there, the 41 car. I can think of the guy. I just can't say the name. But yeah, and it was just one of those. I remember watching the whole day and just, because I had my favorites growing up, and some of those were right there on the clasp, and I thought we'd see the day that maybe Danica Patrick didn't make. How big of a storyline would that have been if Marco Andretti or Danica Patrick couldn't strike it? So it just creates so much more hype and excitement, and again, it gets people out there for that final day and go out there and have a good time, and just that suspense that you don't get today in this format.
Well, see, and you've actually raised a question in my mind here, Tom. Given that Danica has been out of IndyCar for a while, and that we have the potential now for cars to be bumped this year, what are the odds she gets bumped and doesn't even make the 500?
I think very slim because of the power that she has. With Ed Carpenter, I find that really hard to believe there. But I will say in the list, there's a lot of good cars, a lot of good people that are kind of flirting with that spot that might be left out. I mean, you're talking about 36, 37 cars that are on this entry list, and you can only make 33. That's 4 people missing. And and there's definitely a lot of people in there. I mean, with Del Coyne showing great speed like they did last year, that really helps Connor Daly and Pippa Mann a little bit and things like that. So, I don't think that she really has that much of a shot at missing. I think she's pretty well locked in. But it's one of those things. It is a one-off team, so the challenge is there. But Carpenter's been around the horn there before in those one-off teams, especially at Indy.
All right, so before we let you go here, Tom, I'm going to let you make some predictions here. We had you on our preseason predictions show and then had some technical difficulties and weren't able to actually have you on. So we're going to make up for that now. And first off, Tom, who wins the IndyCar Championship this season?
That one's tricky. It could fall a couple of different ways. It could either go the easy answer would be back to Joseph Newgarden, which I think he's very capable of repeating. It's been a while since IndyCar has had a repeated champ. But you could pick any one of his Penske teammates too. I'd be surprised if Simon Pagenaud didn't knock right back on the door after having a little bit of an off year last year. So I think he could really come back and will power as well. But I'm going with Scott Dixon. I know Penske, they finally found something in the Phoenix test, but they said they were kind of struggling with this new car up until that final test. You never sleep on Penske either. But I just feel that that Ganassi can have the upper hand here. They were actually one of the test teams as well at Indy. Things like that. The Penske car was the test car, but the driver was Juan Pablo Montoya. So it's one of those things that, Ganassi's right there. And Scott Dixon's always looking for a bounce back year. I mean, he's one of those guys that when he comes close one year, the next year he normally comes back through and gets it done.
All right, so final prediction here, at least for this time. Tom, who wins the season opener this weekend in St. Petersburg?
That's a tough one. I don't know. I mean, that one's going to be hard. I mean, there's so many questions that haven't been answered yet. I mean, this new car and things like that, and all those shakeups that you were talking about earlier with new faces and new teams coming in and things like that. It's hard, but I guess you just really have to go with one of the safe picks. Will Power's so good on road courses and things like that. So if I had to pick somebody, I guess I'm going to go with the number 12.
All right, so you heard it here first, folks. Will Power will win this weekend in St. Petersburg, and if he doesn't, you can blame Tom.
That's fine. I'll take it.
Hashtag blame Tom Pool. All right. So, Tom, thank you for joining us tonight. As always, it is a pleasure. and hopefully we'll get to talk to you again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
All right, this is Tom Poole, our IndyCar correspondent here at RNN. We'll have more in a moment here on RNN Talks. So we want to thank Tom Poole once again for joining us tonight to talk about the first round of the IndyCar season coming up this weekend, and for making our prediction for a winner this weekend. We'll see if he can do a little better than I have done in the first 3 weeks of the NASCAR season, as I have now picked correctly 2 winners out of, 9 races? So my record's not great, but if you consider, if you put my predictions up against other people's predictions, I'm probably not doing much worse than most other people, if not better than a lot of other people that would have picked the winners of each races each week. Anyway, so speaking of predictions, we will go ahead and make predictions for the NASCAR stuff this weekend. Tom went ahead and graciously did our IndyCar prediction for the weekend, as well as an IndyCar champion for us. So let's go ahead and talk predictions for this weekend's NASCAR stuff. They are at the newly renamed ISM Raceway in Phoenix. We have an Xfinity race and a Monster Energy NASCAR Cup race this weekend. So we'll start off with the Xfinity race, the 14th annual DC Solar 200 from the ISM Raceway. And as I was looking through the entry list for this week, trying to figure out a winner, I came to a realization that, I've had this realization before, so don't look at this and go, you've never realized this before. I understand that if there are Cup regulars in the field, they probably are going to win the race. So I narrowed it down as I was looking through the entry list to it's probably going to be Kyle Busch, Brad Keselowski, or Jamie McMurray winning the race this week. Because Jamie McMurray will be in the 42 car this week for Chip Ganassi Racing. And I throw Christopher Bell in there as well, because Christopher Bell has shown a lot of speed here in the first part of the season. I think he is probably, he might be the only Xfinity regular that can legitimately challenge these Cup guys for wins week in and week out. That being said, no, I'm not going to pick Kyle Busch, because I thought about that, and it's going to get a little boring if I end up picking Kyle Busch every week, even though, let's be real, as much as people love to hate on Kyle for going down into the lower series and winning as many races as he does, he's the favorite every time he gets in one of these races, because he wins just about every one of them that he enters in the Xfinity and the truck races. So at points, it would be hard for you to not pick Kyle Busch in an Xfinity or a truck race. But I am not going to pick Kyle Busch for this one. I made the correct choice in not picking him last week at Las Vegas. Hopefully that stays true this week. I'm going to go with Jamie McMurray this week, winning the Xfinity race, the DC Solar 200 from Phoenix. To be honest with you, no real reason on that. Just I can't remember Jamie McMurray running an Xfinity race for a while, so you know what? I'd just like to see him win this Xfinity race. So we'll see how that works out. Probably won't work out, but we'll see how well that works out for us. So we'll move on now to the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series race, the Ticket Guardian 500, also from the ISM Raceway in Phoenix. And I have learned my lesson the last 2 weeks. Do not pick against Kevin Harvick. And especially at Phoenix, Phoenix has been one of his best tracks in recent memory, and with the start he has gotten off to this season, dominated Atlanta, dominated at Vegas, coming now to a track that he dominates at almost every time he goes there. This is one that I would be really stupid to not pick Kevin Harvick for. So we're going to go with Kevin Harvick. I will probably curse him, and he will not win this race, because that seems to be how this works. Most of the time I'm not picking the winning driver. So if anything else, you can look at this and go, okay, Jamie McMurray and Kevin Harvick will not win this weekend. But that is our picks for this weekend. We'll see how well that works out for us. Jamie McMurray for Saturday's DC Solar 200 for the NASCAR Xfinity Series from ISM Raceway, and Kevin Harvick for the Ticket Guardian 500 on Sunday. So that'll do it for us today for this edition of RNN Talks. Thank you for joining me once again for this edition of RNN Talks. Thank you again to our IndyCar correspondent Tom Poole for coming on tonight and previewing the upcoming IndyCar season for us and talking a little bit about this weekend's first round in St. Petersburg. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss a thing from Racing News Now. Like the video, it is much appreciated, and do not forget to support us on Patreon. That is patreon.com/racingnewsnow. Any little bit is much appreciated, and it helps us continue to grow and give you the quality content that you deserve. So with that, this has been RNN Talks. I will see you on Monday for the pole position. I'm Garth Allen for Racing News Now.